Hey Timberwolves, Miss Robolino coming in with a virtual lesson over the Civil War battles. I'm going to be going through the virtual museum that was created for you to help you understand and place together what's going on, at least from what's important to Texas, as well as what's happening within the United States. So please come along with me as we go ahead and get started. So I want to go ahead and kind of start this from the beginning. If you remember, we just finished our unit on the road to the Civil War. And if you remember, there was a lot of differences between the Union, which is going to be shown here in blue, and the South, which is shown here in red. And what we really start to see right here is that the South is not very happy with how the North, or just how the US government is running things. The South feels very subjected, and they feel that their lifestyle is being threatened, which is why they felt that they needed to secede or to leave from the Union, also known as the United States of America. At this time, we end up with the election of 1860, where Abraham Lincoln is elected president. What we see is the North, or the Union states shown in blue, are very supportive of him because they are mostly Republican, which means they support anti-slavery and they do not want slavery to spread out further west. Abraham Lincoln was very aggressive with his campaign and had made it very well known. He did not want to end slavery, but he did want to stop the expansion of slavery further west in the United States. The South did not really agree with him, and they felt that Lincoln would ruin their economy, and felt the best thing to do at this time was to either, one, just deal with it, or two, leave and start their own country. South Carolina is the first to secede from the Union, with the other following states coming in as well. Texas is one of those states that leaves the Union and joins the Confederate States of America. So this leads us to our first battle, the firing on Fort Sumter. So please come with me as we go through. So with the firing on Fort Sumter, it really starts off very different. South Carolina is part of the Union, or the United States, and then the next day it's not. Because South Carolina was part of the Union, there are different forts around the United States, which means that the Union Army is going to be placed there. At this time in Fort Sumter, the Union soldiers were there, but once South Carolina seceded, they viewed the Union soldiers as enemies and they needed to leave. So the Union soldiers basically tell those inside of Fort Sumter that you need to leave. So the Confederate soldiers are very adamant. The Union soldiers do ask for some time, and they ask for 3 days so they can talk to their commander and kind of get things ready to go. The Confederate soldiers at the time in South Carolina did not really agree with this, and they explained to them that they have 1 hour to leave. So this obviously is not a really good amount of time, and so the Union soldiers didn't leave, thinking that this was just not a true threat. At this time, the Union soldiers did go ahead, load their cannons, and started to fire on Fort Sumter. So this was the beginning of the Civil War. The North had been attacked and viewed this as an act of aggression from the South, and decided it was time to declare war on the seceding states to make sure that they did not secede and to bring them back into the Union. And you can kind of see these pictures, and they're kind of showing the chaoticness, the chaos kind of happening at this time. You could just imagine what people are thinking. Let me just quickly go back. I'm so sorry. And as you can see right here, this is just kind of the perspective of the South and kind of what's happening. This is the Confederate soldiers. They are firing on Fort Sumter, and you can just see the complete readiness that the Confederate has. Please remember that the Confederates are fighting for a cause that they believe in. They believe that their economy is under threat, and they are willing to lay down their lives for that. The Union, on the other hand, is a little bit different, and we're going to talk about that a little later on. Taking a look at the battle facts, we can see what's happening is the Union soldiers are actually very little. And the reason why is because that's kind of who was inside the forts. The Confederate was 500, making this an easy Confederate win, but also starting the war that kind of separates the nation. So the next battle that we are going to be looking at is the Battle of Antietam. What I would like you to take from this is that Antietam happens about a year after Fort Sumter, and it is a horrible, horrible battle. It is the bloodiest battle in American history that takes place in a single day. We're looking at the amount of lives or casualties that have been affected by this is 22,000 altogether. And if you take a look over here, you can kind of see the Confederates had about 10,000, but the Union had 12,000. But it is a lot amount of damage. And what we start to see is this is taking place in Maryland, and it was that known as that brother war. We're talking about brothers fighting against brothers, those who are in the North and the South, fathers fighting against sons, and it is just absolutely chaotic. What happens is that the Union claims this as a victory. However, it really wasn't a victory. It was more of a stalemate, meaning neither side won. And you can kind of see this from one of the primary sources here, transcription from cavalryman James Steptoe. He is kind of reminiscing about this in a letter. And he states that, the Yankees say they routed and demoralized our army. This is false. Our papers will probably say that we whipped the Yankees. This is false too. I think the battle was a drawn fight as we have had since the war. And if there was any advantage, the Yankees had it, for they captured and held a battery of ours, while we failed to hold or secure the one we took from them. The next day, both parties were so exhausted that they laid down in front of one another as quiet as lambs. So this is him reminiscing about it, basically saying neither side won, but if we were to pick a side, it would be the Union, because they were able to hold this particular regiment. So this just goes to show you how crazy this war is and how exhausting it is. So at this time, this allows President Abraham Lincoln to go ahead and give the okay for the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, this is where Abraham Lincoln feels that he can go ahead and give a proclamation that says that all the slaves inside the seceding states, and let me just go ahead and show you. Taking a look at this map, anything that's red, these are the seceding states. However, these light blue right here, these are still slave states, but they did not withdraw from the Union. They stayed with the Union and were fighting with the Union to go ahead and basically go and keep the Union together and being an enemy against their sister nation, which would be the other slave states. So as you can see right here, the Emancipation Proclamation is stated, and it basically frees all of the slaves in the southern seceding states, not all of them. Lincoln was hoping that this would encourage many slaves to leave and go to the north and hopefully join the army. As you remember, many slaves were very scared, and not many can read either. So it really wasn't very successful, but some did leave. So that just goes to show you that this did put a bad taste in the Confederates' mouth, because they're like, you don't have control over us anymore, and you cannot take this economy from us, which is based on slave labor. So as we continue on with our battle, we're going to move from Antietam, and the next battle we're going to be focusing on is the Battle of Galveston. So taking a look at the dates, you can see that Galveston is taking place over a year. The first Battle of Galveston was where the Union troops come in with their navy, with the ironclad ships, and they take over Galveston. I want to remind you that the South at this time, their economy has not stopped. The South's economy is based on cash crops and their plantations, which is supported by the institution of slavery. So that means they still have to continue to sell the cotton to go ahead and get resources from neighboring countries, such as Mexico, South America, and Europe. So the South really needs to keep that economy running, and they have to get supplies from these other nations that they are selling to. They need food, because they don't have a lot of food, because most of their crops are cash crops like tobacco, cotton, indigo. These are things that cannot really be eaten. They also are relying on the ports, because that's how they go ahead and they ship it out. Galveston is one of these areas, and Texas is a large producing cotton state. So this is part of their economy, and they need to survive. So at this time, President Lincoln puts forth this idea of a blockade to go ahead and stop resources being shipped out and being shipped in for the South. He doesn't want them coming in because he doesn't want them to have food, weapons, or resources to be able to fight this war. He figures if he stops these resources from coming in, he can make the South weak and force them to surrender. So this is kind of known as the Anaconda Plan. So this is part of it. Galveston falls to the Union forces, but about a year later, the Texans kind of get together and they decide to do this plan. And that plan is being focused on cotton. These ironclad ships are then piled on top of one another with cotton and kind of looking like this, where it makes it very hard to see where people are and where to go ahead and hit these ships. There are only 2 ships at this time, and there are 6 Union ships in Galveston Bay. These 2 ships were able to go ahead and basically defeat the Union Navy, forcing them to retreat, making this a huge win for the Confederate States because Galveston is now able to continue to sell their cotton and bring in resources for the Confederate United States of America, bring in food, bring in weapons, bring in whatever it is that they need. So this is a huge win for them. So just make sure that you understand Galveston is focusing on the ironclads. Here is just another picture kind of showing what the ships are looking like and kind of these Union ships, which are right here, you can see. And you can see the flag. And then you have your cotton clads over here, which you can see are significantly smaller. But the Union ships do fall. And this is a huge win for the Confederates. As we move on, we can go ahead and take a look at our next battle, which is going to be the Siege of Vicksburg. The Confederates at this time are continuing to push forward into the north, and they are winning every battle on the East Coast. So the Anaconda Plan has been implemented, and now the Union Navy needs to focus on getting control of the harbors and dismantling them and affecting the South to bring in resources. And Vicksburg is one of those areas. So at this time, Vicksburg is along the Mississippi River. So let me just go ahead and kind of show you this map. So Vicksburg is here, and this is the Mississippi River running all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, where a lot of trading is. Mississippi and Missouri are large plantation states, and they rely on their plantations. In fact, if you take a look at their slave population is either half or more. Mississippi has more slaves than they do US citizens. Missouri is about half-half. They have large plantations that are dedicated to cotton, and they go ahead and ship this cotton on the Mississippi River. So the Mississippi River is a huge trading post that allows these states to be able to get resources in and get resources out. The Union thinks that they can go ahead and take over Vicksburg, which also has a large train track. So take a look. This is the Texas Railroad that runs straight through Mississippi that connects the east part of the United States to the west part of the United States. So this railroad, as you can see, if you follow it along, it breaks out and goes and connects the Atlantic to the Mississippi. This is a huge asset for the Confederates, and they need this railroad to give resources to the soldiers in the East who are fighting. At the time, the Union soldiers win this battle and they take over the Mississippi, stopping these resources from going out and stopping the resources from coming in, which means now the Confederate States of America can no longer ship artillery, men, weapons, and food to those fighting. And it really causes a huge damper in them being able to win. So this is a huge win for the Union and a turning point for them, which allows them to go ahead and just win. So just understand kind of what's going on at this time and why this is a huge hit to the Confederate States. So right here is kind of where we're looking, okay? So the Union outnumbered the Confederates. The final battle was 47-day siege on Vicksburg, ending with the Confederate defeat. And you need to remember that this is a huge win for them. And take a look at the casualties. The Confederates really do lose a lot more. They have a lot more casualties, and it's because all about numbers. If you remember, the southern states do not have a lot of people because majority of their population is slave. So they don't really have a lot of people fighting for them. But those that are fighting are very talented and very good. But unfortunately, the numbers are going to go ahead and take that over. As we continue, we are going to be looking at another battle that happened around the same time, and that's the Battle of Gettysburg. As you remember, in the East Coast, the Union being led by this Confederate States being led by Robert E. Lee, were able to breach into Union, specifically Pennsylvania, and they were gaining a lot of territory. If you can just imagine where Pennsylvania is, it is not very far from Washington, D.C., the capital of the Union. At this time, we begin to see that there is a huge loss of Confederate soldiers. In fact, it became the bloodiest overall battle where 2/3 of the soldiers from the Confederates are dead. That's altogether 3,903 are killed and 18,000 are wounded and 5,000 are missing or captured. Those are big numbers for the Confederates. And we know that their population is already small and they cannot replace that. The Union as well loses around 3,000 men and 5,000 are also missing, but 14,000 are wounded. But because the Union is made up of large industrial cities, they are able to replenish these losses a lot faster than the Confederate South. So this really puts a damper on the people being able to fight. Also, Gettysburg is a huge win for the Union because they're able to take the Confederate forces and push them back into the South, making them lose all the territory that they have gained since the beginning of the Civil War in 1861. So you could imagine taking a look at the tension and how close they were together. It is said that the blood was so wet and saturated with blood that it didn't even rain. It was just so saturated. And at this time, with Gettysburg being one of the bloodiest battles ever known in American history, this is where Abraham Lincoln went ahead and gave his Gettysburg speech, basically explaining that we were not, as a Union, going to be separated, and the people that died here did not die in vain, and we were going to go ahead and fight and keep the Union together. Take a look at the last paragraph here. It is rather for us, the living, to stand here. We here be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they here gave the last full measures of devotion. That we here highly resolve these dead shall not have died in vain, that the nation shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. This is one of Lincoln's most famous speeches that he was given on Gettysburg. And it really gave this big war cry that they were going to kind of push forward. And with Vicksburg and Gettysburg happening around the same time in July of 1863 as big wins, this put a huge hit on the Confederate States, which really locked them in for their defeat. Let's go ahead and let's move forward and let's take a look at our next battle, which is going to be focusing on the Battle of the Sabine Pass. The Sabine River is a river that separates Louisiana from Texas. This is also a huge port city for Louisiana and for parts of Texas where there are high amounts of plantations. So this is where the South needs to go ahead and keep shipping out cotton to get resources in. There is also a large a rail line here where they can go ahead and support the East Coast of the Confederacy to be able to give supplies. This is definitely a huge win for the Confederates since Vicksburg has been lost to them. So they need to continue to keep selling and bringing resources in and taking care of the East Confederate coast. So the Union's plan came in just very similar to Vicksburg as part of the Anaconda Plan to go ahead and take this. But unfortunately, the Confederates at this time were not going to go ahead and take this down standing. Taking a look at the amount of people there were only 46 Confederates versus 5,000 Union Navy soldiers. And they won, and they won basically because they were able to hold their ground at Fort Griffin. So 44 Confederate soldiers stationed at Fort Griffin stopped a major Union expedition, taking 200 prisoners and forcing a retreat. It became known as one of the most lopsided battles of the war because the Union was able to go ahead and win this big battle at Vicksburg, but then just a few months later, the Confederacy was able to go ahead and hold out on one of their major ports to continue shipping out cotton and getting resources to the Confederacy. You need to remember the plan was to stop resources coming in and hopefully make the Confederates surrender because they wouldn't have resources to fight. And that was the plan, to end the war quickly. But because of what was happening with the Confederates winning these harbors in Galveston and the Sabine River, it allowed the war to last as long as it did. Okay. As we continue, we're going to go ahead, and the war is starting to come to an end because Vicksburg is winning, and we have Gettysburg. And now many of the people in the South, Confederates, many of them are starving. They are losing ammo, and it gets to a point where Robert E. Lee decides to go ahead and surrender at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. And that happens in 1865. However, you need to remember there is lack of communication at this time. So a lot of the states further out west, like Texas, aren't getting that memo yet. So battles are still being fought. And the last battle to be recorded is in Texas by Brownsville. And that's the Battle of Palmito Ranch, which happens in May 13, 1865. So as you can see from this map here, there is basically Confederate soldiers fighting Union soldiers, and the Confederates are able to go ahead and basically win this battle. As you can kind of see, this right here is a Confederate victory, but it really doesn't matter because the South surrendered. The Confederate States of America surrendered, and they are now going to go ahead and work out an armistice to go ahead and come back in to the Union. So though the battle was considered a Confederate victory, there was little to no gain to this battle because of the surrender. So just kind of make sure that you understand that the Battle of Palmito Ranch is the last battle of the Civil War, and it happened to be in Texas by Brownsville. Okay, so that brings us to a close to all the battles, but I wish to go ahead and go over the advantages and disadvantages that are being shown here. The North had many advantages, and you can kind of take a look right here. The advantages the North has is looking at their railroads. This here is, we're talking about thousands of railroad tracks that are all intertwined with one another. And these were created because of the industries that were inside the North. The North had much industries, which meant that they needed to be able to transport their goods out into the United States as well as out of the United States to these ports. And that was able to be used by Lincoln to transport many of the soldiers in the North, transport supplies, and be able to do it in more than half the time. By the South, they're using more walking power, which means that it takes months to be able to get from one place to another, where now with the North, with the railroads, it takes days. So the North Advantage has 22,000 miles of railroads, whereas the South has 9,000. So that's an advantage to the North. The North Railroad is interconnecting, which allows them to be able to transport people and resources quickly. The North also had a strong Navy, which means that they had more ships, more experience, and they were able to go ahead and implement these attacks on harbors to go ahead and really crush the South and affect them to not be able to have an economy to get resources in. The North also had an industry, and they had lots of money, which means 80% of the United States factories were in the North. Now, the South did have a couple, but not enough to go ahead and sustain them like the North. The North also was able to go ahead and create new machines, like new weapons, new rifles, and it was more state of the art. They were able to go ahead and replace clothes, better boots, better everything. And in fact, they were able to go ahead and kind of start canning at this time and being able to supply food to these Union soldiers, whereas the South really didn't have that. They didn't have plantations to supply food. They had cotton because that's what their economy is run on. The South had their advantage more with the fact that most of the battles were fought in their terrain, which means that they knew their land, they had the home advantage, as well as they had the want to fight, which means they were very proud and patriotic, and they were fighting for a reason. They were fighting for their lives. So the fact that they knew their terrain and that they were able to plan a little bit better gave them more of an advantage, which is why in the beginning of the war, they were winning and able to infiltrate the Union. And they really did almost win. And if it wasn't for the Anaconda Plan and being able, the Union Navy, we can see that the Confederates had a really great chance of winning. Okay, and these you need to remember for the North's advantages, these are going to be the South's disadvantages. And for the Union, I apologize. For the North's advantages, it's going to be the South's disadvantages. And for the South's advantages, it's going to be the Union's disadvantages. So make sure that you understand that. And as you can see, the advantages in the North definitely outnumber the South. The South also did not have a large population. Taking a look, there were about 9 million people in the South, and 3 million of them were slaves, which meant that for every single Confederate soldier that died, it was not very easy to replace them, whereas the North had 22 million people living in the North, and they were easy to go ahead and replace soldiers. And you can see 22 is definitely bigger than 6 million. So the Union had a huge advantage, something with Vicksburg, which the numbers made a huge difference, as well as areas like Gettysburg, where the numbers make a huge difference. It doesn't matter how well trained you are. If the numbers are there and you have lack of supplies, it's going to be almost impossible for you to win. So I hope you are able to go ahead and fill out your paper, and I hope that this gives you the opportunity to understand the Civil War battles. Please make sure you complete your analysis sheet that should have been given to you by your teacher. You can also find it on Canvas for you to fill out. This will give you an opportunity to prepare for the pop quiz that will be given to you later on. That's all I have for you today. I hope this gives you an understanding. If you need help, please come reach out to me or the other social studies teachers. I wish you guys well and have a great day. Bye, Timberwolves.